talk about Japanese cars, we all think of the legendary JDMs like the Supra, the Skyline, the NSX and many others. But a number of times different Japanese companies have tried to build true supercars that could go head to head with the best that Euro could offer. We could mention here the legendary Toyota 2000 GT, the iconic Dome Zero, the Nissan R390 or the Lexus LFA. But a car that looks like the time has forgotten is the Jiotto Caspita. Built in the late 80s, the Caspita was supposed to go against the F40, the 959 and all the other supercars that were coming around that time. And like a number of supercars before and a number of supercars later, Jiotto would try to make a true F1 powered car for the road. But sadly, like basically all of them, they will fail. So hello guys and welcome back to another video. And here is the story of Jiotto Caspita, Japan's forgotten F1 supercar. The story of Jiotto Caspita actually is related to the story of another Japanese supercar, the Dome Zero. This Gran Turismo legend was built by Minoru Hayashi, a Japanese racing driver who decided to build his own supercars in the late 70s. The Zero was powered by a Nissan R390 engine, which produced around 150 horsepower, and thanks to a curb weight of around 850 kilos, the car could produce some decent numbers for the time. But without a doubt, the best part of this car is its design. Now, there have been a lot of wedge-shaped cars over the years, with the Countach definitely being the most famous one. But we also have the Alfa Romeo Iguana and Carabo, the Lancia Strato Zero, the Ferrari Modulo, and who can forget the Holden Hurricane, which were peak wedge design, even though all were just concepts or design studies. For all of you who might say the Cybertruck, come on, we are talking about beautiful cars here, not just cars with sharp corners. But anyways, Dome was on another level compared to all the other cars that I mentioned before, and it's amazing to see how you can make such a beautiful cars, and not just the iconic one, with just straight lines. Dome would go to build two prototypes of the Zero, the P1 and the P2. But sadly the car would never enter production. But if you want to know more about the Dome Zero, you can check their full story on my channel since I have already made a video about them. Like I have said on my previous videos, the late 80s and the early 90s were the true golden age of supercars, with new models coming from different brands and every corner of the globe. And the same thing was happening in Japan. All the major Japanese brands were trying to build a supercar of their own. Mitsubishi had the HSR series, Nissan had the MID4 series, while Yamaha had the wild OX99-11, which actually is related to the story of Jiotto Caspita, but more about that later. In 1988, two businessmen would try to enter this race. These were Yoshikata Tsukumoto, which was the president of the Wacol Corporation, which is a manufacturer of women's lingerie and underwear, making this one of the strangest ventures of a car manufacturer founder. The other partner were Minoru Hayashi, the Dome founder. Hayashi had been building racing cars since the 60s. He had started out by modifying Honda S600s and S800 and entered them in different races all over Japan. And he had found a lot of success, and later he would build cars for Formula Junior. In 1975, Hayashi would go to found Dome, and in 1978 he would present the Zero concept like I mentioned before. But as we know, the Zero concept never went beyond the concept phase. But the story of Dome doesn't actually end here, since they actually are still active, building racing cars for all sports of racing series, and offering other services like designing, engineering and developing production cars. but like I said before, you can check their story on my Domezero video. Something worth mentioning is that this collaboration between Walcol and Dome didn't come out of nowhere. Walcol had been a major sponsor for Dome, like in the Japanese F300 Formula series and on some endurance races. First, Hayashi and Tsukamoto would create WASCAP Committee, which stood for Walcol Sport Car Project. And the main function of this committee was to discuss the cars that they should build. And with the both men being racing fanatics, the best car was a F1 car for the road. And actually, this was one of the first true attempts on building an F1 powered road car. And like with all the other cars that would try to do the same thing later, this would turn out to be something very hard to achieve. After WASCOP, Jiotto Incorporated was founded later that year. Now, I haven't managed to find where the Jiotto name came from. It actually sounds a bit Italian, but in Italian would be with a G and not with a J, but I haven't managed to find what the Jiotto name means. If you know something more, please let me know in the comments down below. Besides Jiotto Incorporated, also Jiotto Design was founded, which was going to be a division of Jiotto Incorporated, where Walcol Corp held 60% while Dome held 40%. Jiotto Design would be responsible for the design, but at the same time would act as an independent design house, in the style of the Italian design houses like Pininfarina, Italian Design, Bertone, Zaccato and many others. Head of Jiotto Design was a young designer by the name of Kunishia Ito. Ito previously had worked on some GM projects, but Jiotto would be his first car that he would design from the ground up, and he would do a fantastic job on it. He immediately started designing the car, his goal being to design the ideal Japanese supercar, showcasing the best that Japan could offer. And like many other designers of the time, he would take a lot of inspiration from Group C racing. Together with Group B, Group C was one of the most popular forms of motorsport back in the 80s, with viewership and attendance even surpassing F1 sometimes. And we can see the Group C influence since Ito's early sketches. Ito would do around 200 different designs, which is very impressive, since all were unique on their own way, with the only common part probably being that the car had a mid-mounted engine. But out of these 200 sketches, only 3 were made into 1/5 wooden scale models, which were mostly used for aerodynamic testing. Even these models were completely different from each other. The first one had quite a futuristic body, and had some unique elements that no other car had at the time, like the integrated rear wing, which looked way ahead of its time, and the side air vents, which suited the car perfectly. The second one looked like a true racing car, with side exhaust, a giant rear wing and a huge side air vent. Also, the model had some beautiful curvy lines that suited the jet-like cockpit perfectly. The third proposal was probably the most 80s looking one. The design featured some side strikes that ran throughout the whole body. Also, the car had a massive rear wing, which reminds me a bit of the F50, again showcasing that Jiotto was way ahead of their time. Another design element that looked very futuristic was the real light strip that ran throughout the whole rear wing. In the end, the first one was chosen, and in my opinion was the best decision. Not that the rest looked bad, but this one was on another level. The work would continue to refine the model in order to make it ready for production, especially on the front part, since the original scale model had a fairly basic front end since it was mostly used for aerodynamic testing. One notable thing was the air vent, which was placed under the front windscreen. Ito would experiment a lot with the headlights, also designing a version with some F40 style ones, with fixed headlights placed under pop-up ones. But the final version would go to be completely different. Also, the rear end was refined, with the focus placed on the electronically adjustable rear wing. But while Ito was working on the design, Dome had started testing the chassis. Now the tests were mostly done for the chassis, since at this point Jiotto didn't even have the body or the engine ready. Now for the engine, Giotto went to Motori Moderni in Italy. Motori Moderni was a F1 engine designer founded by Carlo Citti in 1985. Citti had previously worked with Ferrari, but after having an argument with Enzo, Citti, together with Giotto Bizzarini, would do what everyone who had an argument with Enzo did: found their own company. They would found Automobili Turismo e Sport, or ATS. But his best work was definitely done for Alfa Romeo, with his best engines being his V8s and flat 12s of the Tipo 33. But by 1985 he had become an independent designer, designing engines for different F1 teams. His first engine was a turbocharged V6, which was used by Minardi, but this engine just wasn't competitive enough. Meanwhile, Citti was contacted by Subaru to develop a Boxer 12, since Subaru was planning on entering F1, and they took a 51% share on a F1 team called Scuderia Coloni. The engine, named 1235, was a 3.5-liter Boxer 12 with 5 valve per cylinders and was ready for the 1990 season. Citti originally predicted a power output of 599 horsepower, but the test revealed that the engine only produced 559 horsepower, which was far lower than the competition. For example, the Honda RA190E V10, founded on the McLaren MP4, produced 660 horsepower, but this power output was more than enough for Tsukamoto, and he managed to strike a deal with Subaru, where they would supply the engines and even would take part on the Giotto development. For the gearbox, they went for a 6-speed designed by Pete Wiesmann, which at the time worked with a number of F1 teams, most notably here for McLaren for the MP4. With the design finalized and with mechanical side in a sort of way sorted out, the car was ready to make her public debut. And so the Caspita, as Giotto named it, made its debut at the 1989 Tokyo Motor Show. The 89 Tokyo Motor Show might be one of the best motor shows of all time, since beside the Caspita, a lot of other amazing cars made its debut here. Most importantly, the Honda NSX, but also the Mitsubishi 3000 GT and the second HSR, the Ferrari Mythos, the Toyota 5000 GT, and even the AutoZam AZ1 and Nissan Figaro made their debut at this motor show. But the gorgeous Group C style body, combined with the F1 Boxer 12 engine, made the Caspita a huge hit. Something that also helped were the promised specs of Giotto. The power had been reduced here to 450 horsepower at 10,000 rpm, and the torque was at 362 Nm at 6,000 rpm. This, combined with a lightweight carbon fiber body, which weighed at 1100 kilos, allowed Caspita to reach a top speed of 320 km per hour and hit 0 to 100 in 4.7 seconds. But these numbers were mostly theoretical, since Giotto didn't even have a running car at this point, but promised that a running model would be ready in a short time. They were even planning on entering into Le Mans, which was the target of every new supercar that was coming in the late 80s and early 90s. The price was set at 100 million yen, which was double the price of the F40 for reference. In today's money would be something around $1.5 million. But while Giotto was working on making the production car ready, things for the Subaru Coloni team weren't going smoothly. Coloni didn't even have the car ready for the start of the 1990 season, and the only test of the car was done on a supermarket parking lot in Phoenix before the start of the USA Grand Prix. And of course the car failed to qualify, and basically was the same story for all of the season, with the team failing to enter a single race. This was mostly due to the engine, which besides being unreliable was also very heavy and was not producing enough power. With both Coloni and Citti failing to make improvements to the car and the engine, and after 8 races and no qualifying, Subaru abandoned the venture. Coloni bought back his shares in the team and returned to the Ford Cosworth engine in order to finish the season. Also, with the poor reputation of the Motori Moderni engine, Subaru also decided to withdraw from Giotto. This move of course changed a lot of things, not only because Subaru was supposed to be a production partner, but most importantly, Jiotto didn't even have an engine now. Still wanting to build a F1 powered car for the road, Tsukamoto and Hayashi went to JAD, another engine builder, supplying engines for such teams as Williams, Lotus, Brabant and many others. In 1992, JAD had built a new 3.5-liter V8 for the BMS Scuderia Italia, which was called the GV10. The JAD engine was a big upgrade compared to the Boxer of Motori Moderni, since it produced 750 horsepower and 468 Nm. But like the previous engine, this was also detuned by Dome, and on the production version it produced 585 horsepower at 10,700 rpm and 390 Nm at 10,500 rpm, which would have allowed the car to reach a top speed of 345 km per hour and would have hit 100 in 3.4 seconds, which would have been crazy numbers for the time. But things just weren't meant to be for Jiotto. JAD would leave F1 in 1992, and Yamaha would take over the GV10 project, and they would develop an all-new cylinder head and branded the motor as the OX10. But differently from the Subaru story, Yamaha wasn't interested in the Giotto's project, mostly because they were also building their own F1 car for the road, this being the OX99-11. But we would talk about that car another time. But despite this, Jiotto went on with the project and actually built a functional prototype, which they presented at the 1993 Tokyo Motor Show. Besides the engine, this final prototype also received some cosmetic changes, like the headlights and the taillights, and the new rear bumper, which in my opinion looks way worse compared to the original one. But the most notable change was without a doubt the side mirrors. The original prototype had these vertical mirrors which looked so cool and like nothing else out there, and fitted the overhaul design perfectly, but they were replaced for more normal ones. But despite the hard work of Tsukamoto and Hayashi, and their devotement on making this car a reality, the financial crisis that hit Japan in the early 90s basically killed any possibilities that Caspita could hit the road. And so this was the end of Jiotto. Valco would to sponsor Dome again on some races, but there was no attempt on entering the car into production. Jiotto would have been definitely one of the best supercars of the 90s. The performance, the numbers, the style were on top. Like the Caspita looks fresh even today, and hopefully I'm not the only one here, but I can see some Pagani on its design, especially on the first 1989 prototype. Plus, just the powertrain alone makes this car a legend. The only F1 powered car that has a true F1 engine is the AMG GT1, and that's a 1.6 liter V6 hybrid. There's no comparison between these two cars. The only thing that the GT1 has shown us is that how hard it is to put an F1 car into production. Something quite interesting related to this story is that Koenigsegg, which was in its early days back then, approached Motori Moderni for their Boxer 12 engine, when they reboarded it to 3.8 liters. Motori Moderni would build two engines for the Koenigsegg CC, but with the death of Carlo Citti in 1994, looks like everything was cancelled, even though Koenigsegg would buy the plans and the toolings for the engine. So guys, this was the story of Jiotto Caspita, Japan's forgotten F1 supercar. Hopefully you enjoyed the video and you like this new style. Please let me know in the comments down below, and see you next time.